Good afternoon. Welcome to Changemakers Bite Size, brought to you by SA Partners. We at SA Partners are big believers in lifelong learning, so we've put together these short learning sessions for you to inspire your week. And I'm delighted today to be introducing my colleague Gary Corbett, and who is actually the CEO of SA Partners. Gary's going to be talking about developing your behavioural blueprint. So over to you, Gary.
Thank you. Thanks, Elsa. Hi, everyone. I'm delighted to get the opportunity to take you through this very interesting and often challenging topic. Before I kick off, just a brief introduction for those of you that don't know me. I joined SA Partners back in early 2018, became a partner in 2020. My background is predominantly in finance, and before I joined SA Partners, I spent, about 15 years in manufacturing. SA Partners were actually the company that came in and introduced me and our organization to lean thinking back in 2011, 13, 14 years ago. Over those 13 years, behaviors is a particular topic that tends to come up regardless of the maturity of the organization. It's not always obvious, but it's always lurking in the background. It can often be the difference in a successful program and a less successful one. And this is typically true of the leaders in an organization. If they're not living and modeling the correct behaviors, then we can't really expect anyone else to do it. Hence why we don't always get the results we expect. And we'll touch on that a little bit more later on. I wanted to, start off maybe and talk about, getting some clarity around the terminology. It often surprises me and us when we go into organizations and we ask about vision, mission, values, strategy, behaviors, and we tend to get very different answers. The most common misinterpretation is what a behavior actually is. And look, forgive me for those of you who know this already, but if we just take a moment maybe to clarify some of these, just to help us as we move forward over the next number of minutes and so. So values are our core values that are often described as deeply ingrained principles that guide all of us, that guide all of a company's actions. They serve as its cultural cornerstones. So lots of definitions about values, but I think there's probably a general consensus as to what they are and what they mean to us, whether that's in an organization or for us personally. Examples of these you can see on the left-hand side might include integrity, collaboration or teamwork, respect, excellence, celebrate individuality. And I like the last one, customer obsession, from the Amazon Europe website. Most organizations, and I think there's a stat that I'd read where over 80% of the Fortune 500 companies actually have their values listed on their website. So people don't shy away from these. They put a lot of time and effort and energy into trying to identify what the values or core values of their organization might be. So that's the value side of it, and I think most of us would be very familiar with that. If we flip to the right-hand side and then talk about behaviors, and this is important as we go through this session. So a behavior can be observed, described, and recorded. It's not what we're thinking or what we feel or our intentions. It's the actions we take, or in some instances, don't take. I typically, and we'd often use the example inside in our business that if you can take a video recorder, a phone, I guess, at this stage, and record a particular workshop or a particular group, then what you record are the behaviors. If you can't record it, it's not really a behavior. So it's just something, again, to hold on to as we go through this. So behaviors are those actions or activities that we can see, not the words that describe what it should be. If we take it then to another level, an ideal behavior, it kind of builds on the idea of what a behavior is. but it's the actions that create the desired and sustainable results. So what do we mean by that? Well, if we have a strategy or a vision or a mission that we're trying to achieve and particular results we're trying to get from that, then the desired results should be bringing us towards that. And we need those desired results to happen on a regular basis. And we need to act those ideal behaviors to get to those ideal results. So again, that's important. That potentially means then that they are sustainable results as opposed to just a one-off. The other part to identifying ideal behaviors as opposed to just a behavior is the fact that we need to be very clear on who we expect to carry out that behavior and when or how often they do that. So again, we'll touch on that a little bit later, but it's quite important to understand that piece from a behavior versus a value. And we'll all have seen examples, beautiful posters and wall markings up in organizations telling us what our values are. But the next level down from that is really what we're talking about today, and how you turn those values into behaviors and potentially into ideal behaviors as we've just described. So the Shingo Institute have described what they believe to be 3 key insights, and all 3 mention the word behavior. For those of you not familiar with the Shingo Institute, they're the home of the Shingo model on the left-hand side of the screen, and a model that organizations use to create a culture of excellence. They're also the home of the Shingo Prize, which is a recognized global benchmark in this culture of excellence. The first insight: ideal results require ideal behaviors. I mentioned this one earlier. So to get those results, the ones that we really want, those sustainable and important results, we need to have ideal behaviors. We don't want them just to happen as a one-off. The second one: purpose and systems drive behavior. Again, really important and something that we often lose sight of when we're kind of buried in the system of work that we're all working on or we're all involved in. That system is potentially creating really good behaviors, but on the flip side, can in often cases create poor behaviors. An example of that might be the measurement or the KPIs across your organization. Really important to have that level of accountability for teams and to have the right KPIs in place. But we've gone into several organizations where those KPIs have created almost a silo mentality. I have a metric or a KPI that myself or my team are being measured against, and I am going to do whatever it takes to hit that metric, because there may be bonuses involved, or I'm a competitive individual, or we have a competitive team and we need to hit those metrics. So what that can often create then is, as I said, that siloed mentality, but can also create a blame culture where I haven't hit my metric, but sure, it's somebody else's fault. It's somebody else further up or further down the process. And that kind of blame culture might go against a collaborative value that we've tried to instill inside in the business, which again is going against what we've tried to do. So it's really important to consider the systems that we've created and the types of behaviors those systems are encouraging our teams to adopt. The purpose piece of that is, depending on what we're trying to achieve, it gives us a sense of direction or a sense of purpose or kind of a true north or pathway. So again, are the behaviors, it's important to ensure the behaviors are lined up to give us that. The final one, insight 3, principles inform ideal behavior. So our principles, and we can call them principles and values, they're intertwined, should guide or inform us on the ideal behaviors we want in the organization. This is an important step that's often missed when we go in and we look at organizations. And I guess if some of you folks are here today to listen to this, then maybe this is the missing link inside in your own business. So we've done lots of work in creating our vision, our mission, our values, but what we haven't done is use those then to create the ideal behaviors, and they should inform and guide us in that direction. So the next one then, I guess, and what we'll move on from here is really trying to follow this pathway that I've described. So, getting down to how we get to those real behaviors. And you might have different methodologies on creating and deploying your strategy inside in your organization. But as I said on the previous slide, where behaviors fit is really important. And we have to, I suppose, appreciate the important role that it plays. So again, a typical or an ideal path through here might be the why being our strategy, creating this common social purpose as we describe it. So what is that purpose of the organization? I'm not going to go into any great detail around all of these, but just this ideal pathway of creating a purpose. If we can do that across the team, and we can create a really positive true north for the organization to get behind, then that is a phenomenally powerful exercise if you get it right. It can be quite difficult for some organizations to land on that true north that really embodies what the organization is about. But if they do, it can be extremely powerful. And what you get is a level of commitment from the business rather than a level of compliance. And again, creating the behaviors around it make it so much easier when you can do that. And again, it's often maybe dictated from the top down, which can be difficult for people to buy into. The next piece, once you move past the purpose bit, is creating this strategy. And we must remember that a strategy is not just a plan or a list of activities. A lot of this is born out of, a lot of our strategy is born from, what decisions we need to make. And in often cases, they're tough decisions. So things we might need to start doing that we haven't done in the past, or things that we may need to stop doing that we've been doing up until this point. So again, it's more than just a plan. It's about making those correct decisions that help set up the organization for the future, and hopefully help us achieve the purpose and the mission that we've set ourselves. The final part, the bit then that's often, I guess, not necessarily forgotten about, but becomes the tail end and the least amount of energy put into. And that's this idea of deploying the strategy across the organization in a really meaningful and effective way. Again, really important. And the principle of creating behaviors to bring it to life, very seldom done. Very seldom. And I'm not sure why. I think people maybe get exhausted from the whole process to this stage and then just release it out. We'll do some town halls, we'll get some groups together, we'll tell them what it is, and off we go. And I don't mean to be too dismissive of what organizations do, because some organizations put a lot of time and effort into this, and it does land really well. But they, in our experience, are probably the exception rather than the norm. So again, this final phase of your kind of strategic piece around deploying it effectively across the business, leaders play a huge role, but actually identifying the behaviors to bring it to life is often that little bit of I suppose, magic that's missing. So again, important thing just to put in context. So what I'd like you to do is maybe take a moment and just think about your own organization. So where have you got to on your journey? Have you completed your vision, mission, values, etc.? Have you tried to identify the behaviors then to bring those values to life? Or are you stuck somewhere in the middle? Because what really brings it home, and what really gets you towards this maybe values driven organization, is to work on those real behaviors to bring it to life. So again, huge role in all of this. So just as you kind of sit and listen through this, be conscious of where you might be inside in your own organization, and where you are on your journey, and maybe what the next steps might look like. So I just want to touch again on, we're going to get into maybe having a look at what some behaviors might be or some ideal behaviors, but a quick reminder on what it is, just to bring you back. So again, it can be observed, described, recorded. It must have the people that are involved in it. So who are we holding accountable afterwards to have carried out these behaviors, and how often do we expect them to do it? They need to be very specific and leave no room for ambiguity. Again, this idea of values, they're quite broad. And this is where people get, I suppose, get a little bit lost in the plethora of potential behaviors. The values are designed to be broad so that we can start to interpret them in a really positive way, hopefully. The idea of behaviors, they need to be far more specific, because they're the things that we need to do to bring the values to life. And we believe, and certainly I believe, that they should be harnessed and determined, I guess, at a local level. You should not be told how to behave. If we're in that sort of a space, then the culture is probably quite broken. If we have values and then potentially we have a behavioral benchmark or framework or some sort of guidance, then ideally what we should be doing in our local teams in our local areas is trying to determine the behaviors that we need to live each day to bring our values to life. If you have your values in place, use them as a guide. They can help create that values-driven culture. If you don't have your values, if that's something that's a gap inside your organization at the moment, then there is nothing to stop you creating those ideal behaviors for you and your team to really improve your performance. So think about some of the things. I did this recently in a workshop. So think about some of the results that you're not getting. Maybe some of your metrics are not achieving what they need to achieve. Maybe some of your projects aren't on time, whatever the scenario might be. And take a step back and say, well, what are the behaviors that are causing this to happen? Or maybe a better way of looking at it is what are the behaviors that would help us achieve what we need to achieve? You don't need to wait for the beautiful values to come from on top to do that. You can take a step back and say, what are the actual behaviors that we as a team, and maybe I as a leader, can start to do to really push this forward and start to get the results that we want? So again, very, very, very important. You don't need to wait for this to come from on high. You can actually start to take control of it whenever you like. So let's have a look at a couple of examples, excuse me, of what some ideal behaviors might look like. Well, let's take a look at the top one first of all. So an example of a value or a principle might be respect everyone, or sometimes we see that built around safety. So safety first. A typical behavior statement. So I've created these from, and observed them across different organizations. So they may not be perfect, but I think you'll kind of get the gist of what I'm saying here. So ensure safety is at the front or the forefront of everything we do. You can paraphrase that or change it around, but the behavior that is often described is around putting safety first and putting it at the front of what we do. But that is not a measurable statement, and that is not something that we can necessarily hold people to account to. We can try, but it's not an easy one to do. So what are the actual behaviors that we would like our team members and everyone in the organization to follow? And I'm going to add in another layer of hopefully not complexity, but it can be complexity sometimes, in that leaders or managers or team members may not need to follow the exact same behavior to achieve that value. So the example here is, for a manager, what we'd expect from a manager is every manager starts their weekly tiered meeting with safety, asking the team for examples of risks or near misses or good catches. So if we observe that meeting, we can see the manager starts with safety and they ask for examples. So it's very measurable what the manager does or what the leader of that group does. What we expect from the team members is a little bit different. We expect the team members to give maybe qualified examples of those by over 50% of them each week. So when we say qualified examples, I was trying to put some words in here that would mean we're not just putting stuff up for the sake of it and ticking a box, that we have proper or good examples of near misses, and at least 50% of the team members are contributing on a weekly basis, because we don't want the same person doing it, because then it's only one or two people maybe thinking about it rather than the full team. And you can put measures around all of this based on what you'd expect inside in your own teams. But what you can see there, the behavior that we'd expect from a manager or from a leader is a little bit different. They're both trying to do the same thing, but they're a little bit different than each other. And I'm sure if you got hold of those statements, you could improve them even more and make them relevant inside your own organization. The second one, collaboration. So again, something that we often see up on values. We want a collaborative team and we want to work together and so on and so forth. So it might be a behavior then that someone might describe as everyone has a voice, or everyone gets heard, or whatever that might be. Again, it's very high level and very vague, but it's an example of what we've seen as trying to articulate what collaboration means inside in a business. So the examples given here, so if you take the manager one, every manager ensures all get an opportunity to speak, asking open questions to each participant during a workshop or meeting. So again, very specific. The manager will try and pull everyone into the conversation by asking maybe some really good open questions. What we're expecting from the team members is that when they are asked, that they contribute, that they're not just, nah, I didn't think about this before, so I haven't really thought about it, etc. So you're trying to get them to contribute. But I want to add another layer into this, because you could roll that out tomorrow, or a slightly amended version of that, and I'm sure you'd put far better words around it than I have. But what about if you observed that team, and one of the behaviors that you noticed was that they spoke over each other, and they didn't allow people to finish articulating or describing what they wanted to describe? That doesn't really feed into a collaborative type of a culture. So the behavior, the most important behavior we might want to change, is that the team do not interrupt or speak over each other. So again, it's a different behavior, but it might be something we need to do before we even get to the one described on the screen. And that's why allowing behaviors to be created at a local level is extremely powerful. If we dictate that collaboration one from the top, if everyone's speaking over each other, then it's a waste of time. It just won't work. So what we need is a framework, guidance maybe from our values, so collaboration being maybe one of our values or principles. But what we need our team to do is respect each other. We want to collaborate, so we don't want to speak over each other, etc., etc. So what are the values at that moment in time that will allow us to create the right culture for collaboration? And they could be slightly different in each team. And what we want our manager to do, or the leader of that group, versus the team members, can be slightly different. So again, creating these behaviors is not straightforward, and we shouldn't just be creating 9 or 10 or whatever the number is. We need to create the framework that allows our teams to create them for ourselves. Otherwise, we go back to this compliance versus commitment scenario that I mentioned earlier on. So again, really, really, really important. These are just two examples. I'm sure if you take any of your values inside in your organization and start to pick it apart with some of your team members, you will start to identify the behaviors that are required to bring that value to life. And remember, you need to be able to put a video on it and see it. You also need to be able to say who is responsible and how often do we expect it. So every manager in every meeting, all team members, at least half of the team members in their weekly meeting, whatever that descriptive is, let's be very clear on our level of expectations. I'm going to leave you with a final slide, and probably the most important piece, kind of touched on it earlier on, and that's the role that leaders play. and particularly in bringing our values to life. There's 5 statements there, and the first one I've touched on around defining our core values. So let's enable that to happen across the organization, make sure everyone understands and values and has input into that. The second one is probably the most important one. For me, is the most important one out of those 5. So leaders modeling ideal behaviors. They set the tone for the whole organization by embodying the values we want to see and effectively communicating why we want to see those values. They must lead by example. I'm sure you've all heard of this idea of the shadows that we cast as leaders. We want that to be a positive one, not a negative one. So leading by example is absolutely critical here if we want to create an organization that is really true to its values. Recognizing and rewarding aligned behaviors. So building motivation and morale by celebrating positive contributions that reinforce our core values. We've often gone into organizations and they have fantastic reward and recognition systems, but in a lot of cases, they're rewarding the wrong behaviors. So the person that gets the report out at the last minute, or gets a pallet onto a truck at 6 o'clock on a Friday afternoon so the client isn't let down, and the person in the background who's actually started an A3 or is doing some root cause analysis as to why that happened at the last minute, goes under the radar. With a very mature organization last month, and there was a bit of an aha moment when they kind of had to think back about who had been recognized over the last couple of months. And they were typically firefighters and people who solve problems, on the fly, but the problems didn't go away. The problems were staying. And they had to maybe take a bit of a sit back and reflect on were they actually recognizing the right behaviors. The other two, the last two are somewhat interlinked. So providing this constructive feedback on not ideal behaviors. If we don't tackle this, then those non-ideal behaviors can cause a lot of frustration and can fester inside an organization. So we need a mechanism that we can go to people and say, look, this is not the behavior necessarily that we need. Can we learn something from it and maybe grow into the future? And then that, feedback and reflection on the last one and creating a mechanism to do it is quite important. We need a safe environment where people can both receive and give feedback in the way it's intended. We don't always like it, but we need to create that environment where it becomes a little bit easier. Otherwise, all of this behavior work that we might do just starts to flitter away. So I hope you've found that bite-sized 25 minutes of what goes on inside our heads when it comes to behaviors. Please feel free to reach out to myself or any members of the team if you want to have a chat through this in more detail. Thanks again for giving up half an hour of your time on this Wednesday afternoon. And I look forward to seeing you at future events in the business. Ailsa, and back to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Gary. Thank you so much. It was a really good session, and it's a popular topic, I know, from the feedback I get from the forums and industry generally, ideal behaviors and not ideal behaviors and how to create them. So thank you for that. If you would like copies of the slides, do let me or Gary know. And we hope to see you next week for How to Turn the Ship Around, which is a story of an interim factory manager. And it was being run by Andy Brunskill, who had a major impact on a company recently that he stepped in to support while they were between factory managers. It's a very interesting session. So we hope to see you next week. Have a good rest of the day. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thanks for watching this video. Don't forget to subscribe to the SA Partners YouTube channel and watch our Changemakers Bite-Size series here.